How's it going, everybody? I'm assuming if you are here, you've heard the bad news as well. Yes, the WR250R has finally been discontinued.
No, God! No, God, please, no! No!
There were rumors a few years ago, I want to say in 2017, that it was going to come to a stop, but they released for a few more years, and I'm not really sure the reason why. Obviously, I'm hoping that it's to add something better into the lineup, but it's yet to be announced, and we're kind of left in the dark. So in today's video, we are going to be talking about the history of the WR250R from beginning to end. It's always been a bike that I've been extremely fond of, and I've never had the chance to own. Yes, I have ridden one. I've always wanted one, but I'll get into why I never got one here in a bit. So to start off, back in 2008, Yamaha brought the WR250R and WR250X to the table. The X was just the Supermoto version, which had the 17-inch wheels, but everything else was pretty much the same other than some color differences. To start off, this was a bike that was designed to bridge the gap from other smaller displacement dual sports and bring something more performance-oriented, which we did not have at the time. So they came out swinging with this high-revving 250cc fuel-injected dual sport, street legal right out of the box, and the key word is fuel-injected. There was nothing else like it at the time, and this was a bike that literally came from the future. So I grew up riding dirt bikes, and my dad had owned several Enduros over the years. I was always riding these high-performance motocross bikes, so the idea of getting an air-cooled, low-powered dual sport just really never got me off. As I got older and started moving closer to getting my license, there really wasn't anything on the market that captured my attention. I think the only other street legal options at the time were the XT225, you had the TW200, you had the DRZ 400, and the DR200, and probably a couple others that I'm missing, but those were all prehistoric. I mean, we're talking about dinosaurs here. I was always confused why there weren't more street legal, performance-oriented dirt bikes out there, and it just drove me nuts and it was confusing. So when the WR250R came out, it definitely captured my attention. Now, being a kid, I was still hung up on the 250cc's. I was like, why couldn't they just bring a street legal 450? They have the 250. I just couldn't understand that at the time, and still to this day, we don't have much of anything to choose from. And so while I thought the WR250R was cool, I didn't really take it into consideration until years later. So let's fast forward to 2010, where I turned 15 and a half, and where I live, you can get your motorcycle permit at that age. I ended up getting a street bike. Like I said, I was still hung up on the 250cc's, and there really wasn't anything else on the market that captured my attention. A few years went by, learned some valuable lessons, matured a bit, and I started getting that itch to finally get a dual sport. So where did I begin my search? Yes, right here on this platform, YouTube. I searched best dual sport to buy in 2012 or whatever year it was. And I gotta give a huge shout out to Accidental Broadcast. He has sold more WR250Rs than the whole Yamaha marketing team combined. I binge watched all of his videos. He lived out in Hawaii. He was doing all these crazy dual sport rides, doing all these modifications to his WR250R. He put the Athena 300 kit on his bike. And all the stuff that he was doing, man, it was right up my alley. The performance was there, and he sparked my interest on this bike once again, and I was completely sold. So I know some of you are probably already typing this, so I'll go ahead and address it now. What about the DRZ? Yeah, what about it? I mean, like I said, man, that bike is a complete dinosaur. But some people get hung up on performance numbers. On paper, the DRZ 400S had like 39 horsepower, 26 foot-pounds of torque, compared to the WR's 30 horsepower and 17 foot-pounds of torque. And for some reason, people get hung up on those numbers and don't look any further. I'll just say this, the WR250R is in a completely different league. Everything from the ground up, the suspension, the 6-speed gearbox compared to the 5-speed in the DRZ, everything about the WR makes it a better dual sport and a better machine all across the board. Not to mention, one of the biggest differences, the weight. The WR weighs 295 pounds compared to the DRZ's 317.
Damn!
The DRZ is a tank, it's a hog. Don't get me wrong, it's a great bike, it's super reliable, but you can't deny it's outdated, the suspension is lacking, it's heavy. It's just a step down from the WR250R, which it should be. I mean, the WR is a new platform. So what happened with my hopes and dreams of getting a WR250R? Well, I don't want to get into that just yet. That's a story for another day. Maybe 100,000 subscribers. I'll talk about that, but it never happened. I had some growing up to do, and I kind of took a break from motorcycles for a while. Years later, I started getting that itch again. I had gotten a pit bike, a Grom, and then slowly worked my way up to getting a CRF 250L. Which I feel like, in my opinion, it's really the only thing that you can compare the WR250R to. They're similar in a lot of ways. The KLX 250S is another thing that you can group together, but in my opinion, there's just something about the KLX 250S that just always felt cheap to me. It's like the KLX just felt like Harbor Freight, then you had the CRF 250L over at Home Depot, and then you had the WR250R over at Lowe's. And so I won't speak too much on the KLX 250S. It's a good bike, don't get me wrong. And with the price differences throughout the machines, that's something that might entertain you. But to me, the 250L is just a better comparison. Both 6-speed, both have fuel injection, even similar looks, but the biggest thing that the 250L lacks is suspension and power. The 250L only makes like 23 horsepower. It weighs in at 317 pounds, which pushes it towards the DRZ range, and it's just not even close to being on the same level as the WR250R. So why did I end up with one? I think that's obvious for those of you that watch the channel, but money. At the time, and still to this day, you can find a used 250L for less than half of the price of a used WR250R. The WRs just hold their value. Better components cost more. It is what it is. So ultimately, that's how I ended up with the 250L. I paid less than $3,000 for a very competent machine. And I know you can find good deals on the WRs now and then. Trust me, I've found them. I almost ended up with one, but I was just never quick enough. And that's how I ended up with the 250L and stuck with that. And I don't have any regrets. I've always said that I was going to own a WR250R, and I still plan on it someday. But like I said, the WR250R is just in a league of its own. The suspension, the power, it's a very high revving bike. There is a lot of power to be had, but you have to ride the thing, which is fun for a lot of people. Aftermarket support. If you are a hardcore ADV rider or dual sport rider, the possibilities are pretty much endless with those bikes. I think it's probably one of the most popular bikes to do the Trans-American Trail on, and it's a very capable bike that you can do a lot more with compared to a lot of the bigger ADV bikes. It can be a lot more forgiving, cheaper. There's just a whole list of benefits to using a WR250R over some of the more expensive Adventure Series bikes. So if I had to pick one bike for the rest of my life, I think the WR250R would be pretty high on that list. That really is the definition of a do-it-all machine, the Swiss Army knife of dual sports. From the streets to the trails, hell, I've even seen people jump these things on tracks. They only had the WR250X for a few years. I'm not sure why they dropped that. My guess is they just weren't selling enough units in comparison to the R model. But that brings me back to displacement. Is 250 cc's enough? In that particular machine, yes. Yamaha was able to squeeze a lot of power out of that bike for what it is, and with the lighter weight compared to some of the other options. For example, I watched a WR250R take on a DRZ 400 at a drag strip. The DRZ even had a jet kit and exhaust, but the WR kept right up with it. So power-wise, it has enough to do some highway riding. In my opinion, it's more than enough on the trails. I mean, you can only expect so much out of it. But I do believe that 9 times out of 10, that bike has enough power to do what you want it to do. So, looking forward into the future, what can we expect next? 10 years ago, I was asking the same question as I still am today. Where's the 450cc dual sports? Granted, you have all those European models, but they're really all in leagues of their own. Price and performance-wise, they're all just choked up, plated dirt bikes. And I do have to mention the CRF 450L. I think we can all agree that for years we wanted it to happen, and Honda finally stepped up to the plate. And I can speak on this because I owned one, and for a very short period of time. Unfortunately, myself and many others were just disappointed in the 450L. For the price that you were paying for it versus the performance that you got, it just didn't match up. Ultimately, it was just another choked up, plated dirt bike that was just heavier and slower than other options. We all were hoping for a dedicated dual sport, maybe with a more street-oriented engine, such as the WR250R. For example, the 250L's engine is pretty much straight out of the CBR's street bike. So in my opinion, that is something that I feel like we need. Yamaha just came out with the T7, a highly performance-oriented adventure bike. They definitely have the technology to do it. I would argue that they have the support from consumers to do it, but I would really love to see a more street-oriented performance 450cc or something similar dual sport. Even just a more powerful WR250R, I think we all would be happy with that. The reason that I say more street-oriented is because we already have the plated dirt bikes out there. What most of us want is the reliability, the long service intervals, and just the lack of maintenance. As dual sport riders, we want to spend our time riding the bikes, not working on them and doing oil changes every 10 hours. So all of that being said, I'm really not sure what to expect as far as the future goes. We will see. We're just along for the ride. But I am in the market for another dual sport in the future. Would I buy a WR250R even though they're being discontinued? Absolutely. They are already expensive to begin with on the pre-owned market, so I can only imagine the price increase now. But once again, it's a bike that I've always wanted to own, and I think I need to get my hands on at some point. But we'll see what comes out next. And with Honda's release of the CRF 300L, Yamaha needs to fill that void. But if you made it this far, thank you all for watching. I want to hear from you guys and girls. Drop a comment down below. Let me know your thoughts and feelings about the WR250R. Are you sad to see it go? I know I definitely am, but hopefully this brings good things in the future. But if you're new to the channel and you'd like to see more videos, I drop non-stop riding content. I'm crippled right now, so I'm stuck in my side-by-side, but this coming spring, we're definitely going to be getting back on two wheels. So consider subscribing, drop a like if you enjoyed, and we will see you in the next video.